1943. The Eastern Front is a graveyard of steel. After the titanic clash at the Kursk Bulge, the German High Command received a report that felt like a slap in the face to the legendary Tiger tank. A high-ranking frontline commander stated, without hesitation, that he would trade an entire battalion of heavy tanks for a single unit of assault guns. He wasn't talking about the glamorous Panther or the monstrous King Tiger.
He was talking about a machine that was shorter than a man, had no rotating turret, and looked like a squat steel box. This was the Sturmgeschütz III, or simply the StuG. It was the silent worker of the Wehrmacht, proving that in war, simplicity is often the ultimate sophistication. The StuG III was a financial miracle for the German industry. It cost only 82,500 Reichsmarks, while the Panzer III chassis, it was built on cost over 103,000. It was cheaper to build, easier to maintain, and in the hands of professionals, it was arguably the deadliest target. From the hills of France to the frozen steppes of Russia, this machine was everywhere. It served from the first shot of 1940 to the final defense of Berlin in 1945. More than 10,000 units were produced, making it Germany's most manufactured armored vehicle of the war. To put that in perspective, Germany produced only 1,350 Tigers. The StuG was the true backbone. It didn't have a rotating turret, but it had a low profile that made it nearly invisible in an ambush. In a war where he who fires first wins, this was a lethal advantage. It was the weapon of the pragmatic soldier, the one who cared more about results than medals. But to understand its soul, we must look back at 1918. In the Great War, infantry died because they couldn't knock out a single machine gun nest. Artillery was always too far away. Infantry needed accompanying artillery guns that could move with them and fire directly at the enemy's face. This necessity gave birth to the Sturmartillerie doctrine. In 1935, General Erich von Manstein realized that the next war would be won by infantry with pocket tanks. Manstein envisioned an armored shield for the soldier. By 1937, Daimler-Benz had the first prototypes. By removing the heavy turret, engineers added thicker armor and a bigger gun without increasing the total weight. It was a masterpiece of military economy and clever engineering. The early StuG Osfe carried a short 75mm gun, nicknamed the Stump. It wasn't meant for tank duels. Its job was to blast concrete bunkers. During the invasion of France, it was a revelation. Infantry saw this armored beast crawl up and destroy fortifications at point-blank range. It was love at first sight between the infantry and the assault artillery. The StuG provided a sense of security that a regular tank couldn't. However, Operation Barbarossa in 1941 changed the rules. The encounter with the Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks was a brutal wake-up call. The short-barreled gun simply bounced off the sloped Soviet armor. The StuG had to evolve. In early 1942, the F version arrived with a long-barreled, high-velocity gun. This turned a support vehicle into a dedicated tank hunter. It could now pierce T-34s from a kilometer away. Testing showed that without a turret, the vehicle was a much more stable firing platform. It proved to be even more accurate than the Panzer IV. The rigid chassis reduced vibrations during firing, allowing for consistent hits on moving targets even at extreme distances. Political wars broke out behind the scenes. Tankers wanted the StuG for themselves, but the artillery branch won the right to own them. This meant the crews were trained as artillerists, focused on precision, patience, and long-range ballistics rather than aggressive maneuvers. The AUSFB modification improved the transmission and widened the tracks to 40 centimeters. This was vital for the muddy Rasputitsa seasons in Russia. The machine became more reliable on soft ground, ensuring it could always keep pace with the advancing infantry units. By 1941, the C and D versions moved the gunner's sight to the roof. Earlier models had a sight opening in the front plate, which acted as a dangerous shell trap. Moving it up increased the crew's survival rate significantly and made the frontal armor nearly impenetrable to light guns. The design reached its peak with the AUSFG. This was the most famous version. It featured a commander's cupola with 8 periscopes, giving a 360-degree view. For a vehicle without a turret, situational awareness was the difference between life and death on the battlefield. They also introduced a sock-off or pig's head mantlet. This cast steel shield had a rounded shape designed to deflect shells. When a shot hit it, the energy was redirected harmlessly to the side. It was a triumph of geometry over raw armor thickness. Frontal armor was eventually upgraded to 80 millimeters. It was heterogeneous, steel face-hardened on the outside to shatter incoming rounds, but flexible on the inside to prevent spalling. Even the powerful Soviet 76 millimeters guns struggled to pierce it at standard combat ranges. Later models were covered in zimirit, a bumpy paste that prevented magnetic mines from sticking to the hull. They also wore scherzen or side skirts. These thin plates detonated anti-tank rifle rounds and hollow-charged shells before they could touch the main hull. Inside, the 4-man crew lived in a cramped and noisy environment. The commander, driver, gunner, and loader had to work in perfect harmony. Despite the lack of space, they trusted their machine. They knew as long as they faced the enemy, they were safe. To fight in a StuG was to master the art of the ambush. Because it had no turret, it couldn't fight like a traditional tank. It couldn't drive one way and fire another. The driver and gunner acted as a single brain, pointing the whole 24-ton beast at the target. This required incredible discipline. A StuG commander didn't charge into the open. He found a reverse slope or a pile of rubble and waited. He was a sniper in a steel suit. Its low height meant it could hide where a tiger would stand out like a lighthouse. Soviet tankers often never saw what hit them. They reported invisible ghosts firing from tree lines. The StuG would fire one precise shot and then reverse into cover before the smoke cleared. It was a surgical tool in a war dominated by sledgehammers. The statistics are staggering. Between January and August 1944, StuG units claimed over 4,600 Soviet tank kills. The exchange ratio was often 10 to 1. It was the most effective defensive weapon in the German arsenal, holding back waves of Allied armor. The 185th Battalion is a prime example of this lethality. In just 45 days during the 1942 offensive, they knocked out 229 Soviet tanks with minimal losses. Their secret wasn't just the gun, but the tactical patience of the crews and their superior optics. But the StuG wasn't just a tank hunter. Even in 1944, over 80% of its ammunition was high explosive. It remained the infantry's best friend. When a squad was pinned down, the sight of a StuG clattering toward them was the most beautiful thing in the world. The machine's main weakness was the lack of a turret. In defense, it was king, but in a chaotic retreat or a flanking maneuver, it was a sitting duck. To aim, the driver had to rotate the entire vehicle, which ground up the tracks and made it vulnerable. To counter infantry, many crews welded an extra machine gun with a shield on the roof. This allowed the loader to fight off enemy squads trying to climb onto the hull. It was a desperate solution for a vehicle never meant for close quarters street fighting. The StuG was a favorite among Germany's allies, too. Finland, Romania, Bulgaria, and Spain used these machines. The Finnish experience was legendary, using just a few dozen StuGs. They halted massive Soviet breakthroughs with a kill ratio that defied belief. The quality of the crews was the StuG's greatest asset. They were artillerists, not tankers. They were taught to be methodical and precise. They wore field gray uniforms, distinguishing themselves from the black-clad Panzerwaffe, and took great pride in their unique role. Training for a StuG crew was grueling. Unlike regular tankers, they had to master indirect fire as well as direct hits. They were taught to respect their gun as a precision instrument. This academic approach to warfare made them some of the most disciplined soldiers in the Wehrmacht. Many of Germany's most famous aces didn't start in a Tiger. Michael Wittmann, the legendary tank commander, earned his first Iron Cross in a StuG III. On the Eastern Front, he learned the vital importance of positioning and first shot accuracy in this turretless vehicle. But the real king of the assault guns was Bodo Sprans. He was a master of the hit-and-run tactic. Sprans personally accounted for 76 confirmed tank kills before his promotion. His career showed that a skilled commander could dominate even the most chaotic battles. Sprans' unit once wiped out 61 Soviet tanks in just 6 days of non-stop fighting. It was a level of intensity that broke men and machines. He survived 9 wounds, proving that being in a StuG meant being in the absolute thick of the fire. As Allied air forces began systematic bombing of German industrial centers, the StuG's simple design saved the army. While complex Panther production lines were often halted by missing parts, StuGs could be assembled in smaller, decentralized workshops across the country. The manufacturing process was streamlined to the extreme. Alkit and Mayag factories produced thousands of units even while under fire. In 1943 alone, production numbers skyrocketed, reaching over 3,000 vehicles as the demand for mobile anti-tank defense became desperate. The StuG III also gave birth to the StuH-42, the Sturmgeschütz. This variant replaced the 75mm gun with a massive 105mm howitzer. It was designed to demolish buildings and suppress heavy artillery, providing the infantry with even more devastating pocket firepower. By 1944, the StuG was often the only thing standing between the German infantry and total encirclement. It was used as a fire brigade, rushed from one crisis point to another. If a breakthrough happened, the StuGs were the first to arrive and the last to leave. The interior was a symphony of smells: spent gunpowder, hot oil, and the sweat of 4 men. There was no room for error. A slow loader or a distracted driver meant a quick death. The bond between these 4 men was often stronger than family. Communication was key. Without a rotating turret, the commander had to talk the driver onto the target. Left, more, stop. The driver became the eyes of the gun, and the gun became the voice of the driver. It was a perfect, deadly synchronization. Even in the final weeks of 1945, StuGs were being delivered directly from the factory floor to the front line. They fought in the streets of Berlin, using their low profile to hide behind barricades and ambush massive Soviet IS-2 tanks at point-blank range. In urban combat, the StuG was vulnerable but lethal. It couldn't look up into second-story windows easily, but its 75mm gun could bring down an entire building with a few well-placed shells. It was a brutal, terrifying end to a long war. By the time the guns fell silent, the StuG III had destroyed more enemy armor than the Tiger and Panther combined. It was the silent killer that lived in the shadow of more famous tanks, but it did the heavy lifting of the war effort. Why is it often forgotten in popular history? Perhaps because it lacked the glamour of a massive turret or a 700-horsepower roar. It was a utilitarian tool, a box of steel designed for one purpose: to kill and survive. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. For the average soldier in the mud, the sight of a StuG clattering toward them was better than any medal. It meant they might live to see another morning. The StuG, as they called it, was a symbol of hope in a hopeless war. The legacy of the StuG didn't end in 1945. Captured vehicles were pressed into service by the armies of Romania, Czechoslovakia, and Norway. It was a testament to the vehicle's reliability that it remained useful even after its creators were defeated. The most surprising chapter happened in the Middle East. Syria acquired several StuG IIEs from France and Czechoslovakia in the 1950s. These World War II veterans faced off against modern Israeli Centurions during the 1967 Six-Day War over 20 years after they were built. Historians now agree that the StuG III was the perfect marriage of economy and efficiency. It was the right weapon at the right time. Without it, the German defensive capabilities would have collapsed much earlier under the weight of Allied tank production. As we look at modern warfare today, we see the echoes of the StuG. The concept of a low-profile, highly mobile direct-fire support vehicle is still relevant. The lessons learned in the cramped cabin of a StuG still influence armored doctrine today. Today, surviving StuGs are the stars of museums like Bovington, Munster, and Kubinka. They sit quietly, their low silhouettes still looking dangerous. They are monuments to the millions of men who lived and died in the shadow of their steel plates. We must remember the human cost. Behind the statistics and the kill ratios were thousands of young men. On both sides, the clash of armor was a brutal experience that left permanent scars on the survivors and changed the world forever. The StuG III proved that ingenuity and tactics can overcome raw power. It defied the trend of bigger and heavier tanks. It was a weapon of necessity that became a weapon of tactical victory in thousands of small engagements. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Germany's most successful armored vehicle, make sure to hit the like button. Your support helps us bring more hidden stories of military history to life. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications. We have many more episodes planned, covering everything from the Panzer IV to the legendary Soviet beast killers like the ISU-152. We must never forget the human cost hidden behind these cold steel plates. Behind every statistic, every kill ratio, and every tactical victory, there were 4 young men in a cramped, oil-smelling cabin. On both sides of the front, the clash of armor was a brutal, soul-crushing experience. For the crews of the StuG, every mission was a dance with death. They lived in a world of constant vibration, deafening noise, and the ever-present fear of a kinetic shell piercing their thin side armor. This machine was their home, their shield, and too often their tomb. When the war finally ended, the men who survived the StuG units found themselves in a world that no longer had a place for them. Heroes of the front line became ghosts in the ruins of Germany. Men like Bodo Sprans, who had seen more combat in a week than most see in a lifetime, had to start over from zero. They traded their field gray uniforms for civilian suits, burying the memories of the Eastern Front deep within. Yet, the tactical lessons they learned, patience, precision, and the value of a low profile, would be studied by military academies for decades to come. It was cheaper than a Tiger, more common than a Panther, and in the hands of a determined crew, it was the most terrifying shadow on the battlefield. Until next time, keep exploring the hidden chapters of history.